Hi everyone, welcome back to LaLa Land. Today I am here with the talented Meghan Roach. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Meghan is the CEO of Roots, home of Canada's comfiest hoodies and sweats, which we definitely need in our cold climates in Canada. Meghan is also the vice chair at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation and was named one of Canada's most powerful CEOs. It's so lovely to have you.
Thank you. That's a very nice introduction. I appreciate it.
So I want to start off with a really simple question. Did you see yourself being a CEO and in this high position growing up?
I never really envisioned being a CEO. So when I grew up, my mom was initially a nurse, and then she left her job when she had kids, and my father was a dentist. And so the concept of being a CEO wasn't really just around me when I was at a young age. It wasn't until I got into my career and started seeing and working with CEOs from a board perspective and from an investment perspective that I started to look at it and say, this is a career path that I'm quite interested in.
And how did you find it entering the industry as someone who has, like you said, a dad who's a dentist and a mom who's a nurse? You don't really have that connection around you in the business industry, so you really had to build it yourself.
Yes.
What was it like kind of building your way up there?
I mean, it takes a lot of hard work. I think you have to really understand that you do come into the industry with a little bit of a disadvantage because there are people who have a lot more connections and networks. And so my perspective was always, my parents ingrained this in me as a young child, was hard work is going to really come out at the end. So for me, it was about just doing the best job I possibly could in my role. And then as opportunities came up, I put my hand forward and took those on. But it was really about trying to navigate, if I can prove that I can do this job, or I can prove that I can do the best as possible at the job that I'm doing, then opportunities will open up for me.
And did you ever feel like some of those disadvantages, unquote, that you had, that maybe other people had more connections or so on, did you feel like any of those disadvantages maybe helped you in a way?
I think so. I think because you didn't take things for granted. I think if you take a step back and you look at, my grandfather used to dig telephone poles, right? That was what he started off doing. He was a farmer, and then he did that. He quit school at 15. My father, he was well educated as a dentist, but had to put his own way through school. Like, very different in terms of how they approach things. So I was coming in definitely with an advantage of going to a great school and having a lot of opportunities and privileges from that perspective. But I knew what hard work looked like. My family was very much of the Saturday, Sunday, wake up, here's a list of things you need to accomplish and go off and do them. So I think when you come into something knowing that you have to work harder than everybody else to get there, it does give you a little bit of motivation in a different way. And I never took anything for granted. So I always looked at situations and said, somebody else is not going to get me to the next level. So if I don't do the work myself, it's not just going to come to me. So I think there was an advantage in having to push myself harder. And I found that when I was in high school and in university and then later on in MBA, etc., I always had that in the back of my mind that I have to accomplish this goal on my own. And so I can't be lax in terms of my approach to things. I have to put the hard work and time and effort into place.
So my next question is why? Because you talked about how you really had to push yourself to get to where you are, and you never took things for granted, which I love. But what was really motivating you to continue doing what you do?
I'm just a lifelong learner. I love trying new things and doing different stuff. I mean, I was joking with someone the other day. I picked up Muay Thai, about a year ago, which is something I always wanted to do as a kid and never had a chance and opportunity to do. And then I started picking up coding about 6 months ago too. And it's one of those things where, from my perspective, if you can keep learning, you can keep growing as an individual. Our life is very, very long. And so the reality is that sometimes people say, well, I've got to this level, I've accomplished enough. And for me, there was just never really enough. There's always something different and interesting to do. So I don't know, I think it was just something inherent in me where I just looked at it and said, I want more, I want to try more, I want to do more things. And even in my current role as CEO, I came from a private equity background, so the investment industry. And the idea of being on the operating side, which is what a CEO is, it's just, some people think that private equity is the pinnacle of what you can accomplish in the finance world. And to leave that and then go and be an operator, for a lot of people, just didn't make a lot of sense. And for me, I looked at it and said, well, I'm a good person, I'm great at finance, but I could be much better if I understood the other side of it. So why don't I go and do that and then bring those skill sets back? And I think you have to really just be willing to push yourself into those spaces, and you have to be someone who just is interested in learning more and taking on new and interesting things.
Yeah, I really like how you just take it as it is and you work with it. So what was it like building your way up in Roots? And were there any struggles that you encountered along the way?
Yeah, I think my path was a bit unique because I was part of the group that had acquired Roots from the founders in 2015. And then I was on the board for a couple of years, and then I came off the board when we took it public, and then I came back into the company as interim CFO in 2019, and then went from interim CFO thinking I would go back to private equity, and actually stayed on as this interim CEO and then the CEO eventually. And I would say, coming into a company, first off as an interim CFO, I was coming into a business that needed a lot of work around its distribution center and a couple other things. And I had never really been an operator at all. I had done some operations before, but not to the scale that I was becoming the CFO of a public company. And so I had to come in very humbly and say, I don't really know what I'm doing. Where can I dive into this business and learn things from the ground up? So the first thing I did was actually work in the distribution center. I packed e-commerce packages, I sorted bags, I did a bunch of different stuff. And I learned from the ground level what it was like to be an employee in different functions of the business. So that when I got to eventually be the CEO, I knew the struggles that employees were facing across the business. So I knew what retail employees were facing because I worked in stores. I knew distribution center employees were facing because I worked in the distribution center. And so I would say for me, from a struggle perspective, the struggle was just coming into something and saying, I've never done this before, and all of a sudden I'm going to be the face of a public company, and I have to be out there in front of analysts and out there in front of people all the time representing this brand of Roots. And in the background, I'm thinking, I don't really know what I'm doing. So how do I actually go and do that and present a really confident face? And for me to be able to be confident, it was about learning the business inside and out, knowing everything I possibly could. So I was going to be the smartest person in the room about the Roots business when I got out there to represent the brand. And so that was difficult. It took time, took a lot of late nights, took a lot of effort and investment of my time. But from my perspective, it was worth it. And in the end, I feel much more confident in my role now, not just because I've been in the role for 5 years, but also because I feel I have a really good understanding and grasp of the business from being involved in so many parts of it from the ground level.
So just like you said, it was a lot of late nights and it was a lot of investment into the business. And I loved how you touched on confidence and how you worked on yourself privately behind the cameras in the public. And then you came forward like, I'm ready and I'm going to be the smartest person in the room.
Right.
I want to know, how did being a CEO affect your personal family life?
I think the first thing you have to acknowledge to be able to do it is to realize that you can't really have balance. You can have balance in certain areas. So what you have to do is take a step back and say to yourself, what's most important to me in my personal life and my professional life, and then how do I make those things priorities? So as an example, I rarely see my friends. So I see my family, I prioritize spending time with my kids and my husband, and then I see my friends when I can, but if I was going to make a list of most important people in my life, it's going to be my kids and my family and my husband and my parents, and obviously my work is going to be really important too. So some of it is really just balancing things off a little bit in terms of saying health and wellness is really important. So I go to the gym, pretty regularly to be able to balance off the stress levels. And so by doing that, it means I might have to say, well, I might leave work a little early, but then I'm going to work in the evening. Or I might go really early in the morning to work out, and then I might be a little tired, but I'll still get that in. And from a children's perspective, I think the reality is what you realize is when you have kids, it's difficult to balance it, and you need help. So I have people who help me in my house, which is really fantastic. So babysitters and other stuff like that to support me. But also I recognize that I can't be at everything. So I say to my kids, I want to come to your soccer game, your, parents association, this, and this, but I can't be at everything, but I'm going to be at the things that really matter. And so I'll be there when you want to do X. And so part of it's thinking about those trade-offs and knowing you're not going to be able to do everything all the time, and being honest with both your family and yourself, and giving yourself a little bit of a break to say, the reality is you're not going to be perfect at everything, but you can be pretty good at a lot of things, but there's some things you're just going to have to let go. And that's okay. And so people just have to think about what the trade-offs are for them that make most sense. And I don't think you don't have to say, I'm not going to have a family, but also, people shouldn't feel pressured into having family, right? They should choose what they want to do. And there's some great executives who have no families and are having an amazing time. And there's some great executives who have family and they're also really amazing, but they've just chosen in their lives to prioritize different things. And I think that's acceptable. And I think from a female perspective, we also have to be really open and supportive of each other in that network, and really think about the fact that it takes a village to raise children and to be a successful executive as a woman, and we have to figure out what our village looks like.
So what would you say to other moms that are maybe struggling with the same thing? They're kind of trying to balance between their family, their friends, and their work life.
I think it always looks harder from the outside, and it's harder in your mind than it is in reality sometimes. So sometimes you kind of just have to go off and do it, and then you fail and you figure out, well, that didn't work that time, so how can I do it differently? So the first thing I would definitely say to people is just try. The worst thing that can happen is you take a step back and say, well, that didn't work out that way, maybe I'll do it somewhere else. And if you have a really good value system and you have a really good sense of yourself, like what's important to you, then the worst case that happens is you fall back on that value system and the people that you know are going to be there for you no matter what. And so just taking that as an example, I mean, from a business perspective, obviously Roots is incredibly important to me and I really want to be great as a CEO. But if something happens where I can't make it into work one day, the business is going to be fine without me, right? Whereas if my daughter's in the hospital, she needs me there, right? So there's different things you balance off and you have to think about. So I would say to mothers, just give yourself a break. You're never going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect all the time, but you're going to have some really great days as a mother and some really great days as an executive. And that's great. Like that's the way life is. You have pros and cons and balance at all the different times in your life. And so give yourself a break and also, take the time to also think about yourself and don't just think about other people and their demands on you. Think about how you can also spend some time giving back to yourself too, because if you give back to yourself, you're going to be a better mother, a better executive, and that's really important also.
I love that about balance and just prioritizing different experiences, whether it's time with family or work. So next thing I want to ask you, because you mentioned the word value.
Yes.
What are some things that you value in your personal life and in your business that have really shifted the way that you think and your mindset?
I would say a couple of things. So I think integrity and honesty, kind of hands down, right? So I think it's all about the way you speak to people and communicate with people. So I think first and foremost, having respect for others, that's integral to me. So if you think about that dynamic of, I don't care if you're an executive assistant, or you don't have a job, we all deserve the same amount of respect. And that's really important in terms of how you interact with people. And I think that's something I apply in my office. So we have a very flat organization, which is important to me, and that culture is very different from that perspective. And then that's something I apply outside of my life also. And I've talked about this in various other things I've done, but I think this concept of being authentic, where you have the same person in the boardroom as you do at school pickup, is very important to me. So you shouldn't be running into me in the street and having a conversation with me and then meeting me in a business setting and thinking, these are two different people. You have to be really consistent with that. And then the honesty and transparency part of it, sometimes you have to make really difficult decisions, whether that's in your personal life or in your professional life. And it's much easier to do when you help people understand why you're making those decisions and you're just transparent with them and honest with them about like why this needs to happen. And I think that as I grew as an executive, it became easier for me to do that, but also became more important for me to do that. And when I was younger, I was more focused on, I hope nobody thinks that I'm doing something wrong, and I hope, how can I make sure that everyone thinks I'm really smart? And as I get older, I think much more about how can I make sure people understand why I'm making these decisions, and how can I make sure that people understand why this is in the best interest of our family or the community or the business. And that to me has just shifted, I think, a little bit in terms of how I think about things.
I really have a lot of appreciation for that honesty and transparency, because I think a lot of us get scared of what if they find out about this, or what if my boss realizes that I did this wrong, but instead just being open and honest and just saying like, okay, like you said even at the beginning, I know you went in honesty, you said I don't know everything, but I want to learn and I want to become the best.
Yes.
And that really pushed you to become the best version of yourself. I have one last question for you. What does success look like to you?
So I get asked this question a lot. It's a funny one for me because I don't define success the same way other people do. I don't think success is the accomplishments that you have. I look at success and say, like worst case scenario, someone passes away and you think about what a wonderful person they were. So what did they contribute to society? So for me, success is about, have you met your own internal goals? Are you sticking true to your values? Have you given back to the community in such a way that you're having an impact in a positive way on, the world, your community that you live in, etc. And then I think that the final piece is, have you done everything you think you could do to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish? So for me, success in the background is I didn't give up. I didn't just accept the level at which I could achieve through mediocrity. I kept pushing myself to kind of be the best that I could be. And that best that you can be is going to be different than the best somebody else can be. Yeah. And I think that everyone has to have their own definition of success in that way.
I love that. It's all about thinking about yourself and reflecting and doing some inner reflection about what you want to do in the world, what impact you want to make, and then really putting in the effort and the work to get there.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to have time to spend with you.
It was so nice speaking with you, and thank you everyone from LaLa Land for tuning in today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.